Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're diving into the blossoming strategic partnership between Iran and Russia. If you're thinking, well, that's a pair that goes together like peanut butter and nuclear missiles, you're not far off. Tehran and Moscow are on the cusp of signing a brand new strategic partnership treaty, one that might actually reshape the political dynamics of the region. Russia and Iran are apparently working out a deal that will formalize military cooperation, boost trade, and potentially shore up each other's battered economies. Because if your house is on fire and your neighbor's house is on fire, obviously the best strategy is to agree to share a single garden hose. And if you're both under numerous sanctions, well, misery sure does love company. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
In the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Moscow and Iran have been slowly working their way up to become the best of friends. Much to the concern of many Western observers, cooperation between the two countries has been spreading to almost every sector and several industries. Both countries are sanctioned by Western powers, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that they are seeking common ground. And now they are set to sign a strategic pact, which Iran's ambassador to Moscow says will shape their relations for the next 2 decades.
This agreement is constructive in nature and is aimed at strengthening the abilities of Russia, Iran, and our friends in various parts of the world to better develop the economy, solve social issues, and ensure reliable defense capability.
One of the most visible ways in which Iran has been supporting Russia is through its drone production. Tehran has sold its partner hundreds of Shahed drones, which have been used to strike civilian targets and infrastructure across Ukraine. One area which is particularly concerning, according to experts, is the Iranian nuclear program. Russian help in this regard could possibly pave the way for Iran to fulfill its ambitions of becoming a nuclear power. Such a development would have far-reaching consequences, not just for the region, but the entire world.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now, this partnership is less like a grand wedding and more like a convenience store wedding under flickering neon lights at 3 a.m. Everyone's a bit desperate and hoping they don't end up regretting it when the sun comes up. But let's be fair, Iran and Russia have been warming up to each other for quite some time. They've both been involved in Syria, they've got a mutual interest in pushing back against American influence, and they're definitely in the same self-help group titled countries that could really use some extra cash. But this new treaty is the kind of official step that pushes the relationship from casual dating to meeting the parents. What's in it for Iran? Well, if it goes according to plan, they could finally get the boost that they've been looking for in defense technology and economic opportunities. And any partnership that promises a workaround to those sanctions is bound to generate some excitement in Tehran. Russia, likewise, isn't having the greatest time with global sanctions of its own. So why not sign on the dotted line and see if 2 sanctions nations can combine powers like some big Power Ranger? Now, the critics are concerned, and with good reason. For one, this partnership might accelerate an arms race in the Middle East, like throwing a lit match into a fireworks factory. Already, countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel are keeping a watchful eye on Iran. And given that Russia might be happy to share some advanced hardware with the Iranian military, you can practically hear Middle Eastern defense budgets roaring to life, convinced that they need to keep up with the times. The treaty also points to potential collaborations on infrastructure, energy, and other economic sectors. The best comedic angle here is that we could soon see Iranian oil fueling Russian tankers that then ship goods to countries that are, ironically enough, imposing sanctions on both of them. Like 2 students, both failing a test, decide to copy off each other the next time, only to discover that they're using the same wrong textbook. If Tehran thinks it's tough dealing with current set of sanctions, wait until it's fraternizing full-time with Russia. As we've seen over the past couple of years, Moscow is no stranger to forging partnerships to tip geostrategic balances. So, what should we do about this? Well, one option is to do absolutely nothing, like your roommate who watches the dishes pile up in the sink, silently hoping that they'll spontaneously disappear. At the end of the day, this budding Iran-Russian partnership could just be two exhausted black sheep states telling each other, hey, you got me. But we can't ignore that these are major regional players that do hold some very real cards. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Dr. Łukasz Frederick, head of Institute of the Middle East and Far East at Jagiellonian University. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
So today we are examining the budding friendship between Russia and Iran, which seems kind of interesting to me. Now, we do know that both countries decided to step up their relations even further, due to both countries also being in sort of an economic crisis after all those sanctions. It does seem to me like two broke bums trying to take advantage of each other. But do you think that is actually realistically something that can get them out of the deep waters that they're in?
Well, that treaty is because the first thing is that they are elevating their relationship, which is a long-term one, on the level of treaty, right? So that's not a declaration, that's something more. And they are trying to solidify the relations on numerous fields, right? The economy, which you've mentioned, is one of them. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it is the most important or the most relevant for both governments. I guess that the something which matters the most from the optic both of the government of Putin and the government of President Pezeshkian is the defense cooperation and some clauses which may be included. We don't know if they will be, but those related to defense. Looking at similar events which were happening in relations between Russia and North Korea, it's notable that this kind of documents or agreements may include some clauses which are not a formal alliance, but they are inching towards or inching into that direction. So it is to be seen what will be inside, but I think that the solidifying the relations is mostly about defense, security, and, well, to some extent about economy, but that's not where the real focus is.
Right. Is there a possibility that this is being done now for Russia to sort of show its strength a little bit ahead of this possible negotiation with the Trump administration coming in?
Well, we need to look into history of that treaty because that's an interesting one. You see, historically, it was Iran pushing towards making their relations with Russia or elevating those relations on a higher level. But and Russians, and particularly Putin, was sort of a little bit wary of putting too much emphasis on relations with Iran, mostly because he didn't want to alienate the other important Middle Eastern players, such as Saudi Arabia or the other Arab states. But after a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this was Russia which was pushing Iran into building that relationship, and Iranians were sort of withholding and not pushing that much into entering that relationship. So in the recent months, the Russians were sort of trying to speed up the process, and the Iranians were doing, let's wait. This treaty were to be signed in October during the Kazan summit, but Iranians said that's not the proper venue. So I see the timing of the treaty as an effect of dynamic where Iranians were trying to buy their time and Russians trying to sign it as quick as possible.
Right, so it's a case where they sort of meet somewhere in the middle and then we reach the timing that we're looking at now. So realistically, what is this? Like I mentioned, this is not just a decree or any sort of announcement. This actually is another step up from the kind of relation they already have. So what does this realistically mean?
What does it?
What does this realistically mean when it comes to like the specific practicalities?
Okay, so when we think about practically, we of course these are speculations, right? Because we don't see the treaty yet. But when it comes to practicalities, there will be probably enhanced consultations, probably some mechanism of is institutionalized consultations between either both governments, or maybe parliaments will be included in that treaty. So more often the governments will meet. The other things are related to questions like scientific cooperation, cultural exchanges, and things like agriculture. Those things are usually included in those treaties which are signed by the Russian Federation. So we may expect those things. But as I've mentioned, the center of gravity will be around the defense and security issues. And there is a big question marks here. We don't know it, if there will be a clause which is sort of similar to a NATO treaty consultations in the moment of in which one party is threatened by the other party, right? So that is a big question mark when we think about what of substance may be in that treaty. If Iran and Russia will decide that they will have a mechanisms of sort of automatic consultations, urgent consultations, during the time of crisis or during the time in which one party is attacked by the third party. So that is, in my opinion, the most interesting question regarding that treaty.
Right, I think that is some of the most pressing issue right here, if they will reach something similar to like a NATO Article 5. But do you think that it will be in Iran's interest to sign anything like that, seeing that, well, Russia is pretty much embroiled in a war right now, and it's probably no secret that they're already drawing troops from North Korea? Isn't signing this treaty right now just saying that, hey, Russia, have my troops?
Yes, that's why Iranians were not that enthusiastic in the recent months for speeding up the process. That, as at least as I can see it. But Iran is not in a great shape as well. So I guess that both parties are seeing that utility of that treaty. It is also the question of the internal dynamic in Iran, where the former president who died, President Raisi, who was much more enthusiastic about cooperation with Russia. There is no, it's not a secret that the current president, President Pezeshkian, is a bit more distanced from that perspectives of cooperation with Russia. But we need to also understand that those two countries will try to leverage their relations with the other parties by presenting this treaty as a success. And both countries have in their horizon entering some negotiations with the American administration, and they probably perceive that having a closer relation to each other will strengthen their position in the negotiations. In case of Russia, that's of course about Russia-Ukraine war. In case of Iran, it's of course about the Iranian nuclear program.
All right, that's actually something that I want to draw on because, we're talking about how the new dynamic will be brought about by the incoming U.S. administration, with Trump trying to force Ukraine and Russia to the negotiation table, as well as what we're observing in the Middle East. How do you think this alliance will realistically help them strengthen their position? Is it just that they can speak with a more unified voice, or are there any strategically important issues that might give them kind of legs up when it comes to these negotiations?
Well, presenting a unified front is possible only to a certain degree, because those two issues are sort of disconnected. Namely, Ukrainian issue, Iranians are not very much involved in that file, and of course, Russia is also quite skeptical, to put it mildly, regarding Iran's nuclear program. But that is a very abstract level. On the practical level or technical level, the fact that Iranians are not publicly staunchly supporting Russia on the Ukraine or Russian aggression against Ukraine doesn't mean that Iranian drones are not flying over Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We've got those two levels, like the public declarations and practicalities. Same goes with the Iranian nuclear program. Of course, Russia publicly is unwilling to support that. And certainly the Russians are not interested in seeing Iran obtaining nuclear weapons. But Iranian physicists are trained in Russia. A large part of the hardware which is used in the Iranian nuclear program comes from Russia. So the level of public declarations, that's one level, and the level of practicalities, which goes honestly, it goes even without the treaty. So I don't think that anything of substance will change here. Of course, we have some issues and some, let's say, big technical issues which are behind the scenes, which are ongoing, like the question of supply of Russian jets, Sukhoi fighter jets to Iran. But those things are going like independently of the high treaties, and those negotiations are ongoing since a couple of years.
All right, so there's been a lot of speculation, and like you mentioned, we'll have to see how things shape out. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you very much.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree awarding payments to living World War II veterans. In 2025, Russia will celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany.
Putin's decree entails a $780 award to Russia's World War II veterans. This one-time payment will be handed out to surviving frontline soldiers, their widows, and the former child prisoners of concentration camps. They aren't the only ones who would get something, however. A smaller, around $535 payment will be given to former adult prisoners, home front workers, Leningrad siege survivors, and other defense workers. Russia marks its Victory Day on May 9th. In recent years, the Russian government has been trying to evoke a patriotic mood across the country relating to World War II. In Russia, the war is known as the Great Patriotic War against Fascism. Moscow has been trying to draw parallels between the historical event and the ongoing war in Ukraine by often referring to the conflict as the denazification of Kiev.
Ukraine's domestic arms production has tripled since the last report were published. Additionally, the Ukrainian armed forces also currently number close to 900,000 troops.
According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's domestic arms production currently accounts for 33% of military supply. This is a significant increase compared to the sub-10% levels that were previously reported. The EU is responsible for around 30% and the United States for approximately 40%. Zelensky also emphasized during the announcement, which was made at a joint press conference with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw, that the coordination of military supply with Ukraine's Western allies is crucial. The president also said that there were ongoing talks with allies concerning a potential peacekeeping force in Ukraine. On the front lines themselves, Ukrainian authorities say that Kiev is facing some 600,000 Russian troops on Ukrainian soil. The Russians have numerical advantage in specific areas on the front because of concentrated deployments.
The U.S. Treasury has cracked down on a payment network between Russia, China, and Kyrgyzstan. The network's main purpose was an elaborate evasion of the Western sanctions regime.
The U.S. Treasury Department targeting this sanctions evasion network marks an escalation in Washington's efforts to curb Russian access to international finance systems. It is also meant to restrict Moscow's options when it comes to sensitive technologies. 15 companies and 1 individual were reportedly involved in the scheme, 6 Russian entities and 9 Chinese firms. By taking action, observers note, the US government is showing growing concern with the role China has been playing in supporting Moscow's military-industrial complex. The two countries have not only maintained but even developed ties in the wake of Western sanctions that came down on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The US also took action against the Kyrgyzstan-based OJSC Kemet Bank for its role in coordinating operations with Russian officials and its sanctioned Russian bank.
The United States and Armenia have signed a strategic partnership agreement. The move comes as Yerevan seeks to distance itself from the Russian sphere of influence.
The milestone agreement was signed between the US Secretary of State and the Armenian Foreign Minister in Washington. The partnership will focus on areas of defense, security, economy, and democratization. Antony Blinken has also announced that in the coming weeks, a US Customs and Border Patrol team will travel to Armenia to work with the country's authorities on developing border security measures. The agreement entails that Armenia and the US will begin negotiations on nuclear cooperation in civilian space. Yerevan will also join the US-led coalition to destroy the Islamic State extremist group. Armenia still, however, formally remains an ally of Russia, as it is part of the Moscow-led Collective Security Treaty Organization, though it has suspended its activity as part of it. Armenia made this decision after Russian peacekeepers had not intervened in Azerbaijan's takeover of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2023.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.